Hello, hello. Today we'll be drawing sex rats. As that's what my brain calls her sometimes, because that's the thing that people sexualize from the game, and she's a rat. Isn't my brain clever? It is not clever. I am primarily going to be talking today, probably about Final Fantasy XIV, since that's what I've been mucking about with lately, and I have one or two things to say about it. But I guess it's general Final Fantasy stuff. Seven's coming out soon, that sort of thing. Alright, but until then, I'll actually mention briefly for the people that accidentally click these, is this content? And then they see it and like, oh, no, not content for me, or, this however the straw men in my fantasies act. For those people, the next major project will be coming out somewhat momentarily. I'm just getting an art gripe out there before that comes out. That is a result of a recording being worked on for outsourcing. Like, I outsourced the production of a video, the next Let's Gripe, which will be about villains. So that should be out somewhat momentarily. Just dating the video for the hell of dating the video. I love doing that. Love dating content on the channel. My favorite thing to do. Alright. But yes, Freya Crescent. Won't actually be talking too much about Final Fantasy IX. As far as 9 goes, it's not bad. Like, I think I have the same general opinion of 9 that most people do. And that is, 9 exists, and it's fine. It is not my favorite. The people that really, really like 9 really like 9. They remind me a lot of the hardcores of 8. Like, 8 hardcore 8 fans are kind of crazy a little bit. 9 fans are also sort of nuts, but not that same brand of nutso. Like, you could say, the people that say, oh, 7 was my favorite, the 7 people tend to come across as being, I guess, more casual. Like, they tend to not be, like, big video game people. They're people that played video games whenever they were kids, and they haven't played one for, like, 20 years, but if you ask them, that's what they'll say. That's sort of the impression I usually get of people like that. 8 people are the romantic nutso people that I don't know why exactly they're so in love with 8, but they always come across to me as being kind of crazy. But that's my bias, I guess. If you're wondering about me, of course, knowing me, I tend to not have favorites of anything, as we've been over many times. I am not the kind of person that really falls in love with things. I am critical of everything, including myself, especially myself. So the idea of having something like, oh, that's the best, I'm really not like that. I'm just not. Sometimes I wish I was, but usually I am glad that I am not. It really helps to prevent me from having any exceeding biases for things, and like, one of my biggest problems with dealing with other people usually is saying something like, oh, like whenever I'm going to be talking about 14 later, this will come up, is I will mention something that I'm critical about in regards to one specific thing, about something, it's a movie or it's a game or whatever it happens to be. And the response from people that are obsessed with it is usually they will get angry and say, oh, you hate it, you hate it. Like, no, I said one thing that could be improved, or maybe it's not even something that could be improved, it's just something that I find interesting about it that I don't particularly care for. But, people just naturally gravitate towards extremes for whatever the reasons. They want to just, like, people are very tribal in nature. They put themselves into camps very easily. And if you do not like product, then you are enemy if you do not like product. I wasn't going to talk about this specifically. This is something I've sort of been thinking about more and more lately, is people are, like, identity is one of the most dangerous aspects of being a person, and that, especially whenever you're younger, and this gets, it evolves into different things as you get older. But people are very dependent on their concept of who they are as people. And their identity especially is important. And that's very prevalent in American culture, too. So if someone is in love with Star Wars whenever they're young, like they grew up watching the films or something, then they may associate that product with who they are as a person. They may think of, like if you don't like Star Wars, then you don't like me, that sort of thing. Like that's how people tend to behave. So especially whenever Star Wars movies comes out and people don't like them, or whatever, that fan doesn't like them, then as a result they will get really hostile and like militant, and they start being crazy people. And I think that's what you saw with the sort of Force Awakens sort of thing, is people just started getting nuts because that's who they are. This product is who I am, that sort of thing. And this is sort of how people are. They just, I'm not really like that exactly. Like I'm so, like I'm not. Anytime that I say something like this, I'm glad that I am like that. But just saying that I am like that is almost like saying, well, I'm not like other people. I'm special, or like that. I'm very leery of saying things like that. So, I don't know. Maybe I am in some respects. I just can't detect it. But usually, yeah, I'm just not like that. I don't marry myself to products, and I don't get obsessed with things the way that other people do. Don't know why. But anyways, in regards to talking about things like that, Final Fantasy, favorite Final Fantasy, I'm just not like that. There's different things I like about different ones. I would say that the best overall in terms of what it was during the time that it was produced, I would say that probably 6 is the best one. But in terms of the biggest impression that one left on me is probably 7, just because that's my formative period, and when I was very poor at the time, of course, and 7 was one of the first like actual video games I was able to play. Until then, it was just a bunch of like 500 games on CD sort of deals, and all of those were just like old DOS games or Atari games that people had ripped and things like that. So formatively, probably 7's the best, quote unquote, in that respect. Although it has many, many flaws, and especially after its release, all the extra, like, especially the GACT era shit. Ugh. It's just getting worse and worse, baby. Hopefully the remake will make things a lot better off, but I'm always leery of things like that. Like, they showed off the weird cloud mist thing. Not Cloud the character, but the, like, mist stuff that swirls around people, because they said this is going to link all the games together in one coherent story. Some people, like Max, seemed sort of excited about that. I'm not quite as obsessed with 7 as Max is. I did play the ever-loving shit out of it, so it was like my Dark Souls before Dark Souls, in the sense of I was once very, very knowledgeable about it. Now I've forgotten a lot about it. Like, I'm just not that obsessive of a person, so... But yeah, 7 at the... But, yeah, I'm very suspicious of things like that. They could ruin it very easily. So, it's not that I'm so in love with 7 that I'm like, oh, they better not ruin my baby. It's more just... People fuck up things pretty easily. I fuck up things pretty easily. It's real easy, so the idea that the remake might do one thing that ends up screwing up everything, I wouldn't be too surprised. 8, couldn't stand 8 whenever it came out. I was really disappointed by that, because at the time I was, still in that little formative stage. 7 had just like changed my perception of, holy shit, video games are like doing stuff now. It's nuts. This isn't Pac-Man, because that was about the extent of things for me. So 8 came out, it's like, oh, they can also be bad, or they can be mediocre, I guess is more apt. Like, 8 just did a lot of structural things wrong in terms of its storytelling. There are a lot of things about 8 that I do like. I think, honestly, the flashback sequences in 8 are probably my favorite part of the game. Yeah, I think that's fair. Especially whenever they start going out into outer space, I'm like, what even is this game anymore? Like, in 7 they did, but 7 was a lot... 7 was more ridiculous. A lot of people forget that about 7. 8 8 almost seems like it's trying to be grounded, but then sometimes it just goes completely batshit crazy. And 9 is 9, like 9's just like a cutesy throwback game. It was trying to appeal to nostalgia in an era in which people really shouldn't have been old enough to be nostalgic for that particular thing, but yeah, whatever. I don't really like any of the characters in 9. I do like Freya. Don't give a shit about Amaranth or Queena or the horrid little girl, Aiko or something. Or Dagger. Like, I can't stand the fact that they continue to call her Dagger. She's like Garnet for all this time. And then you finally get the chance to name her, and it's nowhere near her actual name. And they don't even need to keep covering up her name later on, and they just keep using it. Like, it's just fucking stupid. And she's kind of a nothing person, too. Like, she just exists. She's like you know, in movies when there's the love interest or the female protagonist, and she just kind of exists. There's nothing, like, especially memorable about her as a person. She's just there. She's the female. So she, as the female character, she ends up being the most milquetoast out of all of them. She'll probably have a scene where she kicks everyone's asses and she's cool. But as a person, she's just sort of there. That's always been a complaint of mine in regards to female characters, is there's too much playing it safe, and people don't really want to take risks with them, which is unfortunate. And she's sort of that way, too. She's just sort of there. She's not exactly the love interest. She's obviously... You really make an argument that for the most of the game, she's the primary protagonist. She just sort of exists, and that's it. I don't remember too much about her. I remember that her name is Sarah, that her mother's name was Jane. Remember that? Yeah, that's what her actual name was. Like, I remember things like that, just in terms of her characterization. She just existed. And that's sort of my opinion of 9. It existed. It was fine. I just don't care much about it. 10 is probably... Actually, I'd say that 10 is probably overall my favorite in the series. In terms of... This was pretty good at the time it came out. Not the bit like it was getting to the era of making everything overly linear. Like, it has its own problems, of course. I think it was the best in terms of accomplishing what it wanted to be. And it was also a fairly good game at the same time. Lots of annoying things. I didn't like Titus or Titus, however you want to pronounce his name, and Yuna. I cannot stand Yuna. I fucking hate her. That's another... Like, she's another bland-ass motherfucker of a character. Can't stand characters like that. She's like if Garnet or Dagger or whatever, if she was even more bland of a human being. Ugh. Just, ugh. Like, X2 is whenever I realized, oh, this series is going downhill. Like, it is woo. And that was it for me. Didn't play 11. I played 12. Fuck yeah, Fran, but that game has lots of issues. Don't really remember too much about it. It kind of just exists. It's a game that really just kind of plays itself in many ways. Didn't play any of... Actually, I did play 13 briefly. I went over to some guy's house, and he couldn't get past a certain part. I'd never played 13 before. I played it briefly. Like, he said, I couldn't get past this part. Maybe you can. Like, I don't know anything about this game. We'll try it anyways. So I spent like an hour figuring out what the hell the system was, and he was like, maybe halfway through the game, so I had to figure out everything, and I can't remember anything about it now. But I eventually got past whatever boss that he was hung up on. And, there was an embarrassing anime cutscene that we were all cringing about whenever we were getting ready to leave after I'd spent the night over there. And that's my experience with it. I don't really remember anything about it other than, wow, this is stupid. And that was my impression of it. Especially didn't play any of the other 13 games. And that takes us to 14. I actually own 15, but I've never played it. 15 is strange because people seem to have a high opinion of it, but they also have a very low opinion of it at the same time. It's very strange. And we'll see how the remake of 7 turns out. Who knows? Could also talk about Dirge of Cerberus. I played that, and it was trash. But I think I'll pass on that one. Alright, so this is my opinion of the Final Fantasy series, if you're wondering about that. Alright, but just briefly, let me talk about the drawing real fast. You've seen enough of these probably by now to understand what exactly it is that I'm doing. But this one I really wanted to focus more on working up the image in terms of my line work. I haven't gotten to it yet, but I wanted this to be another hatching image, where I focused more on loose line strokes and working up on top of layers, using new line layers, as opposed to just having a completely clean-looking image. So I wanted to experiment more with that. I believe in some prior art gripes from years ago now, I had lamented that usually whenever I go overboard with hatching, then it becomes really difficult to actually color the image because the color tends to conflict with that hatching. Like, because I'm creating so much depth with that harsh, like, black and white shading from the hatching, then it ends up sort of pushing down the color. So I think it's not really that much of an issue for me anymore, and I can't really pinpoint what exactly it is that changed. But I think it might just be that I've stopped using such hard brushes, and now I'm using much softer looking brushes. Like, I've almost practically stopped using my actual brush that I set up that has very hard settings, and I've gone to using my draft pencil entirely that I have set up. If you want to pause the video to look at my settings, there they are. For people that, if you're the kind of person that contacts me and are like, "What are your brush settings?" Like, you just watched the video. Whenever I'm switching to the brush, it shows you all the settings right there. Like, they couldn't be any more clear. And for people like, "What program are you using?" It says so in the corner. Don't send me messages asking stupid questions when it's answered right there. Like, if it's just from, like, "Oh, I saw this one picture from this guy. Oh, here's his contact information." It's fine. Like, I get those ever so often. But if you're watching the video, come on, dude. Come on, dude. No excuse. Come on. Anyways. But that's my goal in this drawing, is to work up all my line work. The color is a little bit more of an afterthought. I really wanted to concentrate more on the line work. So that's what I'm doing. Everything else is pretty self-explanatory, I think. There's nothing, I think, that requires me to talk too much about it, other than the fact that I'm just erasing away, like, draft work here and there. I do like the sketchiness of the draft work, but usually I have to go back and fix some of it, because, like you see on her collar there on that left side that I'm working sort of near right now, and I'm starting work on the hatching here, there's too much of it that I sketched around, so it's creating too much drag and pulling to one side. There I go. Got rid of it just then. So there's some of that. Just whenever you're doing that sort of workup, you end up having to go back and clean things up. Sort of the problem with doing this sort of method is that the first draft of the image is going to be so completely different from the even the secondary one, much less the final, that you'll end up having a lot of skewing, a lot of bleeding over in terms of line work. So you end up having to push that initial draft down so far in terms of opacity that you may as well not even have it there at all most of the time. So you tend to have to do a lot of cleanup work as a result. All right, but Final Fantasy XIV, I guess I'll talk about that. Yeah. Drinking a Coke that's been sitting opened on my desk for probably the past 5 hours. I have these giant things, and I open one whenever I wake up sometimes. And I'll, like, drink it for the first meal, and then I'll just be sitting there for the rest of the day, and I'll keep drinking it. Bleh. That's my reaction. Alright, 14. I've been playing the Trial of 14 lately. I don't like MMOs. I'll say that first. I do not like traditional MMOs. I did, however, this is what confuses people. Like, why are you playing that? But that's my favorite fucking reaction from people. Like, anytime I criticize anything that I've been exploring lately, well, why are you doing it then? Like one of those jackasses. Pat's like that. I'm sure you've heard him say it. um, like, because I like exploring things. I like gaining new experiences. What? Plus, I played a shitload of Guild Wars 1. And I think I've even talked about this on the podcast. I know I've talked about it before in videos. And I've been using Pat's Discord. He has a little 14. Oh, here I'm adjusting the resolution. Most, I think, modern phones have 1920 1080s, except they're vertical. So, anytime that I find that I am making a drawing that is overly vertical, I've gotten to where I'll just say, well, I'll may as well make it sized enough that people could, in theory, use it for a phone wallpaper if they wanted to. Since the children these days are like that. So that's the reason why I did that. Otherwise, I don't care what the resolution is, just as long as the whole thing fits. And here I am zoning out the color, so that's what I'll be doing for a long time from this point forward. All right. But that's my favorite thing when people demand to know why are you experiencing something that you're not in love with, and that goes back to what I was saying earlier about how people sort of create brands for themselves. I was a while back asking on Twitter if there is a scientific term for it was better when I was 12 sort of thing that people do, where kids will often experiencing like me with 7, like that's sort of that same era. Most people will experience something during that era, like they'll be raised on, say, the Star Wars prequels or something like that. And then they'll grow up and say, well, they weren't that bad. They're actually better than the originals, and you have to deal with those people. That's because that's just what they grew up with. So as a result, they can't really see it objectively anymore. It's just this sort of trashy thing that they became obsessed with because that's what their parents sat them in front of, that sort of deal. I'm sure there's like, oh, I'm not like that. You probably are, if you're obsessed with the Star Wars prequels. Just saying, you probably are, and you just don't know it. But this is sort of a human nature thing, like I was talking about earlier. But I was asking if there was a scientific term that actually explores that, and most people just, well, that's just nostalgia, stupid. And I had to point out a list of like Wikipedia entries in regards to cognitive biases, and it's a list of something like 200 of them, and there's probably easily like 50 or so that are different kinds of nostalgia. So it's not enough to just say, well, it's just nostalgia, and then just crap that onto the ground and go, well, I'm done, I solved it. Like, that's the reason why we have the study of things, is to, extrapolate and explore them. It's not enough to just do that. But that specific thing, and I couldn't find one, so I eventually just had to make up the term of, what was it? Comfort branding. That's what I ended up calling it. And I called it comfort branding because of that sort of modern experience of associating yourself with a brand of something. And that's what you go back to whenever you want to feel that comfort of nostalgic reminiscing. Or you want to, not even nostalgia, just like, yes, this, me, that sort of thing. I'm sort of that way in regards to Guild Wars 1, I found. Sort of. Like, as much as I can be anyway, since I'm just so negative a person, you see. And I'm that way, like, I played that game almost 10 years. Like, I played it, like 8 or so. As long as it took for Guild Wars 2 to come out. Because once 2 came out, I played that for like 1 month, and I realized, oh, this is like garbage. This is just trash. And they started releasing the Ascended weapons, and it's like, oh, they're trying to just capitalize off WoW. Like, it's just another one of these things. This game is absolutely nothing at all like what I actually enjoyed about the first game, so I just dropped that entirely. Apparently the stupid Cormier cartoon that I drew years and years ago is still well known and popular amongst the Guild Wars community. and I had to upset them like a year or so ago when people were like, "Come talk to us on the subreddit. We want to see what's going on," because I'm sure they wanted me to do content for Guild Wars 2 or something. And I had to give them the bad news that I don't have a very high opinion at all of Guild Wars 2. In fact, I have a very low opinion of it. But anyways, that primarily is the reason why I started exploring 14, is because I have fond memories of Guild Wars 1, and I like Guild Wars 1 because you may not know about anything about it, but Guild Wars 1 originally began with this idea that it was going to be a PvP-centric thing, which, if you know me, is like, wow, you? Yeah, me, actually. No, I didn't actually have any interest in the PvP component initially, but point being is whenever they released it, they found, people actually enjoy the PvE component as opposed to the PvP, so they started elaborating more on that, and before it even came out, they had developed a campaign and whatnot, although initially the campaign was more to direct people into the PvP, and you saw what happened there is it developed and became its own thing to the point that now Guild Wars 2 has almost nothing to do with PvP whatsoever. But that game operated more on a sort of Magic the Gathering sort of system, in the sense that 14 and WoW, I don't have any experience with WoW, I never played it, don't care to, have more of a hotbar system where you have, like Star Trek Online, I have quite a bit of experience playing that game just because Star Trek. It's sort of like this as well, where you might have 4 hotbars, and they're just full of skills that don't really do anything. They're just buttons you press and then damage happens. And they might have long cooldowns, they might have short cooldowns. It just depends on what kind of game it is. And then you'll go from 1 to 2, and then you'll press the 2 button, and then that'll do even more damager. And then you'll press 3, and you press 4 and 5, and you just keep doing that. And in 14's case specifically, that's pretty much the entire game. That's all it really does. Especially compared to Guild Wars 1, there are rotations that optimize your DPS output. Oh, I hate talking about this. Even talking about it makes me kind of cringe. But your goal is generally to just optimize your DPS output during your run. So they even have tools like Final Fantasy 14 rotations.com, I think is the name of the site, where people will like say, well, this is the series of 1, 2, 3 buttons that I press in order to generate the biggest damage I can. So the general gist of the combat in these MMOs is just, can you maintain the rotation while avoiding like AoEs or things? Just the monster is gonna like put down the glowing thing that causes damage to you, and you need to move out of the way. But don't forget about doing your rotation while you're doing that at the same time. And that's the game. That's the whole game. From the lowest level to the highest level. That's everything. You're not really interacting too much with the monsters. You're just sort of just doing that. And I'm sure lots of 14 people are getting angry. Oh, that's not the only thing. No, seriously, compared to something like compared to like any other type of genre of game. Like, if you're comparing it to other MMOs, yeah, I'm sure it's a little bit more in-depth than WoW is, from the impression that I get of WoW. But, like I said, I don't like MMOs for this reason. Like, if you're going to compare it to, like fucking DMC or something, obviously, you're just pressing buttons. That's all you're doing. Like, it's not complicated. You'd have to be a rocket scientist to understand any of this. Briefly going over Guild Wars 1 in terms of its combat. Its combat was more this Magic the Gathering style system, where you had, 8 buttons total that you could do. Like, you had a hotbar, one hotbar, just one, and it was 8 skills that you could put in it. It could be whatever you wanted to. Each class had hundreds of abilities that you could discover and unlock. You could collect all the abilities, and some people were like that. They just got all the abilities, and once they were done, they were done. And there were also other professions. So you could be like a warrior, or a necromancer, or an elementalist, and so forth and so on. And you could have a secondary profession. So you could be a warrior necromancer, or a warrior elementalist. You get the idea. And you could combine all the abilities, except for elite abilities. And there was not an overabundance of those. There were quite a few of them by the end of the game's lifespan, but there weren't too many of them. So if you were running a secondary necromancer, you couldn't use necromancer elites, for example. And the way the equipment worked was you could raise your attributes in that game, and raising attributes like makes you do more damage and stuff like that. So if you were a primary in profession, you could get your like one stat up to like 16 because of a gear, and you could only wear your profession's gear, and that would have like +1 to a stat and stuff like that. And a secondary, you couldn't wear their armor, so as a result, that was stuck at like 12. It was stuck at 12 attribute. So as a result, if you ran a secondary skill, then you would not deal as much damage as a result. So that was sort of the balancing of it. There were some circumstances like a warrior running Paragon could actually do more damage with Paragon skills because of some weird interaction with its primary strength attribute. Like there's a bunch of like math and stuff. It doesn't really matter too much. But generally, the only reason why you would use the secondary profession skill is if there was some form of utility associated with the skill. So with Final Fantasy XIV, its skills are more like, this button does this amount of damage, the next button does that amount of damage, but it does a little bit more damage if you use the first button first. And almost every single one, by the way, this final part where I'm doing the background is me playing, so it ends up taking like hours. It's like 2 hours or something. So that's what the whole end of the video is going to be. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry to me in the past, too, for doing this. But that's all of 14. Like, almost all of its abilities are like that. There's 1 or 2 abilities that are like, you can interrupt an enemy's actions or something. And those are kind of rare. Almost all the skills are just, this has 100 potency, this has 120 potency, but it has 200 if you use it, after this ability. And it's just this sort of like a math problem of which ones do you actually use in order with one another. And that's the whole game. And there will ever so often be a skill that's like, it doesn't matter what ability you use, just use this, it has 90-second recharge, you deal 10% more damage. And then you'll have another one that's like, do 5% more damage, but the skill itself sucks. So just use this once every 20 seconds or so, and just keep doing that repeatedly, every 20 seconds. Otherwise, never use this skill. Like, everything's like that. In Guild Wars 1, it was more... there were different lines of skills. Like, you could be a warrior, but there would be hammer abilities, there would be sword abilities. You could use a bow if you wanted to. You could use a spear if you wanted to, even though those weren't primary, like, class weapons. Hell, you could use a wand if you wanted to. I knew some warriors that did that. You could do pretty much anything. And there was, like, axe abilities. So most people would run axe because that was the DPS sort of one that you used for spiking people down. I preferred using hammer because hammer skills were like... one of my favorite builds was... This is another important distinction. In 14, you will unlock, like, 60 abilities. And you can use all of them at the same time. Because there's no real concept of building in that game. It's just... here's all the shit. Just use all of it all at once. In Guild Wars 1, of course, you had limits, so as a result, you had to actually choose what you were using, and that was very important to making your build. Even though one of those slots was occupied usually by a resurrection ability, and as a result, you really only had 7. And another one of those would be occupied by an elite ability, and that usually dictated how you used everything. So one of my favorite things to do would be to, say, use a warrior and maybe run a... Wait, I think you actually could use elites from secondaries. I can't remember. It's been years since I played it. But I would like to... No, that's right. Okay. I would like to use a warrior ability that calls, like, the daze effect on myself. And I think it was called Headbutt. So I would do something like run up to a mage, headbutt him, and that would make me dazed. And the condition of dazed causes all of your skills to take longer to cast and makes all of them easily interruptible. And for a warrior, that almost never comes up because warriors don't use spells. They use, like, adrenaline-based abilities and stuff like that. But I would now have the dazed effect on me. I would use a necromancer ability called Plague Touch that would transfer any negative conditions that I had on myself, up to like 2 or 3, I think, onto my target. So after headbutting and causing myself to be dazed, I would then use Plague Touch to transfer that dazed effect from myself onto the healer. And as a result, anytime that I would strike them, they would have their skills interrupted. Because all of their skills are usually all spells. And this comes up a lot in PvP. The human target would go, oh shit, I have dazed on me, and I can't like cast a mend condition or something on myself to get rid of it because I'm being interrupted, right? So they would try to immediately run away. And to that end, I usually brought a skill like what's it called? Like Bull Strike or something like that. But it's just a normal attack that does X amount of damage, except if they happen to be moving at that instant, then whenever you hit them, they fall down. So I would chase people around, causing them to be interrupted, and anytime they would try to run away, I would hit them with this ability. Although you had to time it correctly. You had to guess when they were going to do it. So, and that was like one kind of ability. Another that I would like to run on a warrior, I mainly play warrior. I played everything, but, that's probably my favorite overall, is I like playing a hammer warrior and doing something like wailing on someone long enough to build up enough adrenaline. There are different kinds of these. There would be like one hammer ability that drained all of your adrenaline at once, no matter how much you had, but it would cause a knockdown almost instantly. So I would use that initially, and people will think, well, he wasted all of his adrenaline on this one move, so as a result, I don't have to be afraid of him. But I would use an increase attack speed stance that would allow me to attack faster at the cost of dealing less damage, for example. And that would allow me to build my adrenaline back up while they were on the ground. And you could also have like other like runes and stuff that would make it so that they stay on the ground longer if you're running that kind of build. So, while they're on the ground, I would use this to build up my stamina a lot more. And after that, I would use another adrenaline-based ability that would also cause a KD, or a knockdown. So my entire build was focused not on actually dealing damage, but just making them fall down over and over and over again. Basically just stun-locking them, or trying to. And of course there were ways of getting out of this. But that's generally what I was doing. Well, here we are, final picture. You can tell I liked Guild Wars 1 because there was just so many things that you could do with these abilities. But here we are, there's Freya. Technically, it rains in Bermisia all the time, but fuck that shit, I wanted it to snow. So there we go. There's your phone picture, kids. Don't you like it? Yay, yay me. Alright, but you guys get the idea. That's my general thoughts on that. Guild Wars 1, I fucking love the way the skills interacted, because there was just so many things that you could do. You could make an elementalist that also was an assassin, so you could teleport next to someone, push them down, cause an earthquake around them, set off like a tornado on top of them, like slit their throat in the process, and then teleport away. Like, there's just so many interactions, whereas 14 is just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you can see in terms of combat why I just do not care too much for 14. Or just MMOs, really. But ignoring the combat, and I should have talked more about this, but ignoring the combat, I liked 14 in terms of some of its storytelling. Unfortunately, because of the trial, I was stuck in a Realm Reborn, which is well known for being the worst, by far, section of the game. They really need to do something about that, by the way. Made myself a nice little cat girl. She's pretty. I really want a female Hrothgar, which just came out, but they haven't released those yet. Some of the storytelling is pretty spot on. Some of the... Like, you can tell when a quest is new or not. I got to the end of that Titan segment, though. God, what a... Oh, that was some of the worst... Like, that's some of the worst storytelling I've ever encountered in a game. It's this section where you have to go prove yourself to the company of heroes. And it's just them making you run around, like, doing fetch quest shit for, like, a crazy guy in a cabin. And whenever you get back, they're like, ho, we made you run around, ho. And just from that, they're like, okay, now you're ready. You're ready to go beat the boss now. I'm like, what? From what? You haven't done anything. Like, oh, we sure are great, huh? Like, I was so fucking annoyed. Like, I wanted to murder everyone involved. The place that place is called Costa del Sol, which is even more offensive because it looks like a shithole. It's just a dirty beach with some wood on it. That's it. It sucks. It fucking sucks. Anyways, I should have talked more about that. Maybe next time, though. Alright. See you guys later. Bye.